I think there's a few key elements in that journey to move students towards living out this holy life within the context they find themselves. First of all, again, at the very foundation is helping our students understand that they're not their own. They actually belong to Christ, right? So Paul defined his reality by saying, I no longer live, but Christ lives in me. The life I live by faith in the Son of God who gave himself for me. So you're not your own. You belong to Christ. That's a very, very good thing. Very, very good thing. Then the second reality is to help them understand that God has called them to a very significant life. And see, in our culture, we define significance primarily in making much of self, and that's seen primarily physically, our looks or our ability to perform. And so we have this, we have this God-given desire to be great, right? Jesus Christ never chastised his disciples for wanting to be great. He chastised them for how they defined greatness, right? You lord it over others with your power and your authority. And so what we have to help them to see is that the significance God has called them to is not in making much of themselves, but to humble themselves, make much of Christ by following his example and serving others. So what we do is we help them understand God has designed you, he's gifted you, and now he's calling you to live missionally by serving others, and that this is your way of doing what is good for others, right? And so I think oftentimes we have seen gospeling as a us versus them reality. And what we're saying to our students is gospeling is about journeying with others and helping them to see the reality of Christ both in your actions and in your proclamation. And that this is the most loving that you can be for someone else. And so when they have that kind of a missional mindset, and when they understand that this isn't about confrontation, this is about journeying with and helping others see the reality of Christ, there's something relational that happens there that's really significant for them because they're wired so relationally, and so they don't see that in terms of opposition, but in terms of being with. Now, of course, this is going to create conflict in a society whose values are radically different than Christ's values, right? And this is where, again, we just got to keep going back to this, that we have to help our students see the reality of Jesus Christ. Because if they really see his supremacy, which is the word that I use, if we really see how significant he is, then we're willing to lose much because what we're losing is nothing compared to him, right? This is what happened with Job, right? Satan's challenge with Job when he came to God, he said, Job only likes you because of your gifts, God, that's it. And God says, no, Job loves me because of me. And so when Job lost everything, he was able to say, in the midst of much grief, because it was real, but to be able to worship and say, hey, naked I came, from my mother's womb, naked I returned, the Lord gives, the Lord takes away, blessed be the name of the Lord. Because he saw the reality of God and said, that's way more significant. And if you look in Hebrews chapter 10, which I think is amazing, here we have these followers of Christ who are losing everything for the sake of the gospel. They are living holiness, radical holiness. And it says that they had joy in the midst of much loss because they knew they had a greater reward. They had Christ. So they've seen the significance of Christ. They know nothing compares to him. So I'll sacrificially love others. And so again, if we're going to help our kids to be holy, they have to see the beauty and reality of Jesus Christ and experience him powerfully in their lives. Because holiness will cause us to be sacrificial for the sake of others. And we can only sacrifice well when we know that what we're losing is nothing compared to what we gain in him.
So what does that look like?
Yeah.
Because, we talk of the disciples and we speak of people in the Bible, but, many young people will say, well, that was the past. I mean, they don't have Facebook. They don't have all of these things that we have today. So what practically does that look like for a young person living today? Seeing, sexualized images everywhere. How do you practically live that?
Yeah, again, I think this is the role of the mentor and the coach and the youth pastor that's journeying with kids, to help create a lens through which they interpret all messages, a biblical world and biblical faith and life worldview. That becomes their lens through which they interpret all the messages that come their way, right? So Colossians says, don't be taken captive by empty philosophies, right, or philosophies of the world, or however that term goes. And so if we can help our students create a lens where they can interpret the messages coming their way through a biblical lens, understanding that God's design is not just right, it's good again, that's going to give them the ability to be discerning in the decisions that they make, and to understand that the gospel deals with every area of our life and faith. So how I respond on Facebook and how I journey with my friends on Facebook, I have a theological lens through which I interpret and understand how I should engage that. When it comes to the issue of sex and sexuality, which is primary for an adolescent, I understand that God has a good plan, and I have to continue to help them to see the reality that his plan is both right and very, very good. I love John Piper, who I read a fair amount. He says that our goal is to help them to understand we're not just avoiding something erotic, but we're also pursuing something excellent. And so if we can continue to help them to see that God's plan is good and engages every area of life, so he speaks to these issues. He speaks to Facebook. Believe it or not, he does. He speaks to sexuality. He speaks to identity formation. He speaks to relationships. All these things that are core to the development of a student, to the reality of who they are, he speaks to that. And if we can hear him speak to that and help kids to see that this is really good, it's not just right, it's also really, really good, then that can shape them and transform them. And also, if we do this over time, we must see this as a journey. We must live this out with them. We must be incarnational in our journey with them towards holiness, so they see us being developed and changed. They see our faults, and they see the way we respond to those, and we move alongside them so that they can actually see that the truth of Christ brings freedom in our reality. Boy, that changes stuff. This is not small. This isn't easy. This isn't one talk. This is about us growing roots deep in the reality of Christ and living that out over time with the kids that God has brought into our life.